Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves stumbling out of the biting wind and into the warm, smoky embrace of a medieval tavern. Imagine the scene, the air thick with the aroma of roasting meat, spilled ale, and unwashed bodies. A lute player strums a jaunty tune in the corner, competing with the boisterous laughter and heated arguments swirling around you. Tankards clink, dice rattle on wooden tables, and the flickering candlelight dances across faces flushed with drink and camaraderie. This wasn't just a place to wet your whistle, it was the heart of the community, the news hub, and, let's be honest, probably the best, and sometimes only, place to get a decent meal that isn't gruel. Of course, you probably won't survive the night without encountering at least one brawl, a questionable stew, or a proposition you definitely want to refuse. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Let me know in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the heavy, creaking door, and the wave of warmth washes over you. The reek, surprisingly, is almost comforting. You're instantly enveloped in a cacophony of sounds and smells. The fire crackles merrily in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows on the roughly plastered walls. Above you, strings of sausages hang from the rafters, alongside dried herbs and the occasional unfortunate rat. The first thing you notice is the sheer variety of people crammed into the relatively small space. There's a burly blacksmith, still covered in soot, arguing loudly with a sheepish-looking farmer. A group of traveling merchants are huddled around a table, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight as they haggle over prices. And in the corner, nursing a tankard, sits a lone traveler, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. He looks like he's seen better, or perhaps worse, days. You make your way to the bar, a rough-hewn plank of wood worn smooth by countless elbows and spilled drinks. The barkeep, a stout man with a booming laugh and a perpetually stained apron, eyes you up and down. "What'll it be, stranger?" he asks, his voice raspy from years of shouting over the din. You order an ale, the house special, naturally, and he slams a foamy tankard down in front of you. The first sip is surprisingly good, a little rough around the edges, but refreshing. You find an empty spot at a nearby table and settle in, eager to soak up the atmosphere. Now, the medieval tavern wasn't just a place to grab a drink. It was a social hub, a vital part of the community. In fact, in many villages and towns, it was often the only public space available to the common folk. While the church served as a center for spiritual life, the tavern was the heart of secular life. It was where people came to hear the news, to gossip, to celebrate, and to mourn. Historians still argue whether the tavern's influence was primarily positive or negative, given its potential for encouraging drunkenness and disruptive behavior, but there's no denying its centrality to medieval society. You listen to the conversations around you, piecing together snippets of information. The blacksmith is complaining about the rising price of iron, blaming the local lord for his greed. The farmer is worried about the upcoming harvest, fearing a drought. The merchants are discussing rumors of war in a faraway kingdom. It's fascinating, really. This tavern is a microcosm of the world outside, a place where the concerns of everyday life are debated and dissected over tankards of ale. It's also a place where you might get a good deal on stolen goods if you know the right people, but that's a different story. You notice a game of dice going on at a nearby table. A group of men are huddled around, their faces tense with concentration as they roll the bones. Money is changing hands rapidly, and the air is thick with anticipation. You watch for a moment, tempted to join in, but decide against it. You've heard stories of rigged dice and crooked gamblers, and you're not feeling particularly lucky tonight. Suddenly, the lute music stops abruptly. A hush falls over the tavern as a man climbs onto a table. He's dressed in tattered clothes and carries a worn-out scroll. Hear ye, he shouts, his voice cracking with age. I bring news from the king. He proceeds to read out a proclamation, announcing new taxes and calling for men to join the royal army. A collective groan rises from the crowd. No one likes taxes, and even fewer are eager to risk their lives in a war. You can practically feel the tavern mood souring as he finishes his announcement. Historically, royal proclamations were often announced in public spaces like taverns, ensuring that even the illiterate could hear the news. It wasn't exactly the most efficient way to communicate, but hey, they didn't have Twitter back then. Although, come to think of it, a tavern brawl could be considered the medieval equivalent of a Twitter feud. The man finishes reading and steps down from the table, disappearing into the crowd. The lute player starts up again, but the music sounds a little more somber now. The conversations resume, but they're more subdued, laced with worry and uncertainty. As you sip your ale, you notice a peculiar symbol etched into the wooden table. It's a small, intricate design, unlike anything you've seen before. You ask the barkeep about it, but he just shrugs. "Don't know, stranger," he says. "Been there as long as I can remember." You run your fingers over the symbol, wondering what it could mean. Is it a mark of some secret society? A religious symbol? Or just a random doodle carved by a bored patron? The mystery intrigues you. It's also very likely someone spilled their drink and it just kinda looks like something. Now, here's a little-known fact. Some historians believe that certain taverns served as meeting places for clandestine groups, using coded symbols to identify themselves. Others dismiss this as mere speculation, arguing that the symbols were simply decorative or related to the tavern's name or history. As the night wears on, the tavern becomes even more crowded and boisterous. More ale is consumed, more stories are told, and more arguments erupt. You watch as a couple of patrons get into a heated dispute over a game of cards. Words are exchanged, insults are hurled, and before you know it, fists are flying. A brawl breaks out in the middle of the room. Tables are overturned, chairs are smashed, and the air is filled with the sounds of grunts, shouts, and breaking glass. The barkeep tries to intervene, but he's quickly overwhelmed by the chaos. You wisely decide to stay out of the fray. You've seen enough tavern brawls in your life to know that they're best avoided. Besides, you wouldn't want to ruin your perfectly good tunic. The brawl eventually subsides, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The combatants, bruised and battered, are dragged outside by their friends. The barkeep surveys the damage with a sigh. "Another night, another mess," he mutters. In the corner, a cloaked figure watches the scene with detached amusement. You notice a glint of metal beneath their cloak, a dagger, perhaps. You decide not to make eye contact. Some people are best left undisturbed. You finish your ale and decide it's time to call it a night. The tavern is starting to feel a little too rowdy for your taste, and you're starting to feel a little too tired. You thank the barkeep, toss a few coins onto the bar, and make your way towards the door. As you step back out into the cold night air, you can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. You've experienced a true slice of medieval life, raw and unfiltered. You've also probably contracted at least 3 different diseases, but hey, that's part of the experience, right? The tavern, with its noise, its smells, and its colorful characters, has left a lasting impression on you. You know you'll never forget your night in the tavern's heart. And who knows, maybe you'll even come back tomorrow night for another round. Just remember to wear something you don't mind getting stained, or torn. Okay, settle in, friend. Let your shoulders drop, maybe wiggle your toes a little bit. We're about to embark on a journey, a mental voyage, if you will, back to the cozy, slightly sticky, and definitely boisterous world of the medieval tavern. You trudge along a muddy road, the low sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and in the distance, you see it, a warm, inviting glow spilling from the windows of a building. The sign creaking above the door is barely legible, but the sounds emanating from within, laughter, singing, the clinking of tankards, are unmistakable. You quicken your pace, driven by the promise of warmth, company, and maybe, just maybe, a decent pint of ale. Now, the first thing you'll notice about the tavern itself is that it's probably not quite as romantic as you imagined. We're not talking about gleaming oak and perfectly polished brass. More like roughly hewn timbers, a lot of dirt, and a lingering smell of stale beer mixed with something vaguely animal. The walls, usually constructed from wattle and daub, a mixture of woven sticks and mud, are thick, designed to keep out the harsh elements. Stone was definitely a sign of wealth, and while some taverns in larger towns might boast stone foundations or even a full stone structure, most were primarily wood-framed. As you push open the heavy wooden door, you're immediately enveloped in a wave of heat and noise. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dim light, which flickers from a central hearth and a few strategically placed tallow candles. Tallow candles, by the way, were made from animal fat. Lovely, right? Adds a certain ambience. If you're lucky, there might be a single beeswax candle flickering on a table, a sign of a more upscale establishment, but don't get your hopes up. They were expensive, after all. The floor is packed earth, strewn with rushes, kind of like fragrant, dried grass, to soak up spills and, well, other things. They would occasionally be replaced, but not nearly often enough. Imagine the smell of that combination. Honestly, you're probably better off not imagining. The furniture is simple and functional, long, wooden trestle tables and benches, designed to accommodate large groups of people. There are no individual chairs, no cozy nooks for intimate conversations. This is about communal drinking, communal eating, and communal everything, really. Remember, personal space wasn't exactly a priority back then. You might find a slightly elevated platform at one end of the room, for traveling musicians or perhaps even a bard to tell epic tales. Which, by the way, were probably only slightly more embellished than your average modern news broadcast. Speaking of entertainment, music was a huge part of tavern life. You might hear a lute, a fiddle, or even a simple drum providing the soundtrack to the evening's revelry. Dancing was also common, although probably not the refined kind. Think more along the lines of enthusiastic stomping and spinning, fueled by copious amounts of ale. And let's not forget the games. Dice games, card games, though cards were still relatively rare, and various other forms of gambling were popular pastimes. Just be careful who you're betting against, some of those medieval card sharps were notoriously good at palming aces. Behind the bar, if you can call it that, stands the tavern keeper, a stout and usually jovial individual. He or she is the heart and soul of the establishment, responsible for pouring drinks, serving food, and generally keeping the peace, or at least attempting to. You see a collection of wooden barrels lined up behind them, each tapped with a simple spigot. These hold the tavern's main offerings, ale, beer, and perhaps a bit of cider or mead. Wine was available, but it was expensive and usually reserved for the wealthier clientele. The quality of the drinks varied wildly, depending on the brewing skills of the tavern keeper and the availability of ingredients. Some ale was strong and flavorful, while other brews were, less so. Water was often unsafe to drink, so people, even children, consumed ale and beer regularly. It was weak, sure, but still. Historians still argue whether this constant low-level intoxication actually had long-term health effects on the population, but it probably didn't help. Now, let's talk about food. The menu in a medieval tavern was generally simple and hearty. Think along the lines of stews, bread, cheese, and perhaps some roasted meat, if you were lucky. Remember, refrigeration wasn't exactly a thing, so the food had to be either preserved, salted, smoked, or pickled, or consumed quickly. Spices were expensive and rare, so flavoring was often achieved through herbs, onions, and garlic. And if you're a vegetarian, well, good luck to you. Your options would be limited. One popular dish was pottage, a thick, vegetable-based stew that could be easily adapted to include whatever ingredients were available. It was cheap, filling, and could be cooked in large quantities, making it perfect for feeding a crowd. It was also probably incredibly bland by modern standards, but hey, beggars can't be choosers, right? And speaking of what you should eat, just be thankful that you can go to the bathroom in a designated area, instead of, well, you get the idea. As the evening wears on, the tavern becomes increasingly crowded and raucous. The air is thick with smoke, the smell of sweat, and the sounds of drunken revelry. Arguments erupt, songs are sung off-key, and friendships are forged over shared tankards of ale. You might even witness a brawl or two, although most tavern keepers were quick to intervene before things got too out of hand. After all, a broken nose isn't good for business. Did you know the term rule of thumb may have originated in medieval times? It was said that a husband could beat his wife with a stick, as long as it wasn't wider than his thumb. While that tidbit is disturbing, it's always important to know. And you'd probably see it in a tavern too, or worse. You start to feel the effects of the ale. Your head spins a little, your limbs feel heavy, and the faces around you seem to blur into a smiling, singing mass. It's a strangely comforting feeling, this sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than yourself. The tavern is a place where social barriers break down, where lords and peasants can drink side by side, though maybe not at the same table, and where everyone can forget their troubles, at least for a little while. Now, something interesting, while taverns were primarily male-dominated spaces, women played a crucial role in their operation. Tavern keepers were often women, either running the establishment on their own or assisting their husbands. They were responsible for managing the household, brewing the ale, preparing the food, and dealing with the customers. It was a demanding job, but it offered them a degree of economic independence that was rare for women in medieval society. You go, girl. The roles taverns played in society is really quite interesting. Taverns were more than just places to drink and eat, they were also important centers of social and political life. They served as meeting places for merchants, artisans, and travelers, where news and gossip were exchanged, deals were brokered, and alliances were formed. They were also often used as impromptu courtrooms or polling places. In fact, some historians argue that taverns played a significant role in shaping public opinion and facilitating political dissent. After a few hours, you've grown tired of the revelry and decide to head back out into the night. The air is crisp and cool, a welcome contrast to the stuffy warmth of the tavern. As you trudge back along the muddy road, the sounds of music and laughter fade behind you, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the hooting of owls. You glance back at the tavern one last time, its windows glowing like warm beacons in the darkness, a reminder of the camaraderie and simple pleasures you experienced within. You'll probably need to bathe 3 times before your clothes don't smell like whatever concoction of smells that place possessed. And just before you go, if you happen to visit a medieval reenactment fair or historical village, don't be surprised if the tavern smells vaguely familiar. Some things, it seems, never change. Okay, friend, that's all the tavern talk for tonight. Safe travels and pleasant dreams. You trudge down the cobblestone street, the late afternoon sun casting long, distorted shadows that stretch and writhe like mischievous spirits. The air, thick with the smells of wood smoke, roasted meat, and something vaguely floral that might be someone's attempt at perfume, clings to you like a damp blanket. Your boots, scuffed and worn from days of travel, echo against the stone, a rhythmic counterpoint to the lively chatter spilling from the open doorways of the taverns that line the street. Ah, taverns. Havens of rest, questionable ale, and even more questionable company. But tonight, you seek something more than just liquid courage or a place to lay your weary head. You seek knowledge. Knowledge, my friend, hidden in plain sight, written in the language of signs. Now, before you start picturing a bunch of bearded dwarves gesticulating wildly, although, let's be honest, that is a tempting image, I'm talking about tavern signs. Those colorful, often comical, wooden or metal placards that dangle precariously from wrought iron brackets, promising warmth, sustenance, and maybe even a brawl or two. In a time when literacy was, shall we say, less than universal, imagine a world before cat videos and overly opinionated comment sections. These signs were crucial. They were the billboards of their day, broadcasting a tavern's wares and atmosphere to potential patrons. It's like Yelp, but with more potential for scurvy. You pause before a particularly intriguing example, a crudely painted boar impaled with an arrow. The bristled arrow, the sign proclaims in slightly chipped lettering. Interesting. On the one hand, it could simply mean they serve boar meat. On the other, it might be a not-so-subtle advertisement for the establishment's prowess in archery competitions, a real selling point, assuming you like being surrounded by competitive archers after a few pints. Or maybe, just maybe, the owner was a terrible artist and that's supposed to be a hedgehog. Who knows? And that, my friend, is the beauty of tavern signs. They're ripe with ambiguity, open to interpretation, and often layered with meaning that goes far beyond the literal. Think of them as the Renaissance emoji. You stroll on, your gaze sweeping over the array of signs. A golden lion rampant, a red dragon coiled around a flagon, a surprisingly cheerful-looking skull holding a tankard. It's a veritable menagerie of symbols, each whispering its own secrets. Each with its own story to tell. Now, you might think this is all a bit fanciful. Just some old-timey marketing, right? Well, consider this, the prevalence of heraldic imagery in tavern signs wasn't just decorative. It was often a direct nod to local lords or noble families. A tavern displaying their crest might be trying to attract the patronage, and, by extension, the protection, of that house. It's like name-dropping, but with more heraldry and less social media anxiety. Historians still argue whether the ubiquity of certain symbols, like the green man or the sun, reflects a lingering connection to pre-Christian pagan beliefs or simply a desire to evoke feelings of prosperity and good fortune. Personally, I think it's a bit of both. Humans are nothing if not nostalgic for things they only vaguely remember. You find yourself drawn to a sign depicting a simple bunch of grapes. The grapevine, naturally. Seems straightforward enough, right? Wine. But hold on a minute. In some regions, the grapevine was also a symbol of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine and revelry. Which means this tavern might be a bit more enthusiastic in its celebrations than your average alehouse. You shudder slightly, recalling a particularly rowdy Bacchus festival you once accidentally stumbled upon. Let's just say it involved a lot of grapes, even more questionable singing, and a surprising number of people dressed as satyrs. You decide to keep moving. Mainstream history tells us that taverns were more than just places to drink. They were also important social hubs, serving as meeting places, marketplaces, and even makeshift courtrooms. Think of them as the early internet. Except instead of arguing with strangers about politics, you're arguing with strangers about which ale is the best and then challenging them to an arm wrestle. Now, here's a quirky little tidbit for you. Some taverns even use their signs to communicate secret messages. A sign depicting a specific animal, for instance, might be a code for a local smuggling operation or a meeting place for a clandestine society. It's like a hidden password, but instead of typing it into a computer, you're ordering a pint of the spotted pig with a knowing wink. Who knew ordering a drink could be so espionage-y? You notice a sign that's, well, it's a mess. It appears to be a rendering of a dog, maybe. Or possibly a mangled badger. It's hard to tell. The paint is peeling, the wood is cracked, and the whole thing is hanging at a precarious angle. The squinting squirrel, you squint at the barely legible lettering. Oh, dear. This place looks rough. But something about it piques your curiosity. Maybe it's the sheer audacity of calling whatever that is a squirrel. Or maybe it's the lingering scent of desperation and cheap liquor wafting from within. Either way, you feel compelled to investigate. As you step inside, the noise hits you like a physical blow. A cacophony of drunken laughter, off-key singing, and the clatter of tankards fills the air. The room is dimly lit, the air thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. You spot a barmaid behind the counter, looking utterly defeated. "Rough night?" you ask, offering a sympathetic smile. She just sighs and points to a particularly large and boisterous patron who seems to be attempting to juggle tankards of ale. He drops one. Predictably. Historians still argue whether taverns were dens of iniquity and vice, or essential components of community life. I'd wager it was a bit of both, depending on the tavern. Much like, well, pretty much everything in life. You order a drink, something vaguely resembling ale, and find a relatively clean corner to sit in. As you sip your beverage, you notice something odd about the other patrons. They all seem to be staring at you. Not aggressively, mind you, but with a quiet, almost unsettling intensity. It's like you've wandered into a secret society meeting and nobody told you the dress code. Just then, a grizzled old man with a patch over one eye approaches you. "You new here, friend?" he asks, his voice raspy from years of shouting over tavern noise. You nod. "Thought so." You got the look of someone who's lost and confused. He chuckles, a dry, rattling sound. "This ain't just any tavern, you know. It's got history. Secrets." He leans in close, his breath smelling faintly of stale beer and regret. "The sign, it ain't just a sign. It's a map. A key." He pauses, letting his words sink in. "To what?" you ask, your curiosity piqued. He smiles, a slow, knowing grin. "That, my friend, is for you to discover." He winks, turns, and shuffles back into the crowd, leaving you to ponder his cryptic pronouncements. A map? A key? To what? Perhaps the true meaning of the squinting squirrel is far more profound than you ever imagined. Or perhaps he's just had a bit too much ale. Either way, you have a feeling your night is about to get a whole lot more interesting. You take another sip of your ale, your eyes scanning the room, searching for clues, for answers. The tavern signs, once mere decorations, now seem to pulse with hidden meaning. You realize that you've stumbled into a world of symbols, secrets, and possibly even a little bit of danger. Welcome, friend, to the language of taverns. May your sign reading be fruitful and may your next pint be less questionable. And hey, maybe you'll even find that squirrel. I'd honestly be impressed if you did. Alright, settle in, pull up a stool, and let's get comfortable. That's right, you. You've been traveling all day, haven't you? Dust clinging to your boots, sun beating down on your, well, whatever you're wearing. Probably something itchy. You deserve a drink. But not just any drink. We're going to dive deep into the wonderfully varied world of tavern beverages. Forget that modern swill. We're talking the real deal, the stuff that fueled empires, inspired terrible poetry, and occasionally led to bar brawls that made the local constabulary wish they'd taken up pottery instead. So, you stumble into the tavern. The air is thick with the smells of wood smoke, roasting meat, and something vaguely sour. Probably the beer. Don't worry, you'll get used to it. The light is dim, flickering from candles and the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. A bard in the corner is strumming a lute, poorly, you think, but you're too polite, or tired, to say anything. Just nod along and try not to make eye contact. Now, what to order? The most obvious choice, and likely the most prevalent, is beer. But not the carefully crafted IPA you're used to from your local microbrewery. This is rougher, more rustic stuff. We're talking ale, mostly. Thick, cloudy, and often brewed with whatever grains were readily available. Barley, sure, but also oats, wheat, maybe even a little rye thrown in for good measure. And the flavor? Well, let's just say consistency wasn't exactly a top priority. One batch might be surprisingly palatable, the next, an acquired taste. Think of it as a liquid lottery. Sometimes you win, sometimes you get something that tastes suspiciously like damp straw. But hey, it's wet and it has alcohol. What more could you ask for? Interestingly, beer wasn't always the drink of choice for everyone. In fact, in many parts of Europe, wine was considered the more sophisticated option, especially if you were, somebody. Wine was the drink of kings, nobles, and anyone who wanted to pretend they were kings and nobles. Of course, wine back then wasn't exactly the same as the elegant Bordeaux you might be thinking of. It could be thin, acidic, and often heavily spiced to mask any imperfections. Imagine a jug of vinegar that someone accidentally dropped a cinnamon stick into. Delicious? No. Drinkable? Probably, especially after a long day on the road. Speaking of being on the road, you're probably wondering where all of this glorious booze came from, right? Well, a lot of taverns brewed their own beer. It was a way to cut costs and keep the profits in-house. Plus, who better to ensure the quality of your beverage than yourself? Okay, maybe someone who actually knew what they were doing, but let's not dwell on that. The brewing process was, well, let's just say it involved a lot of wooden barrels, open fermentation, and hoping for the best. Sanitation wasn't exactly a high priority back then, so you often ended up with a product that was, shall we say, robust. But not every tavern brewed its own. Larger towns and cities had dedicated breweries, churning out ale and beer on a much larger scale. These breweries would then distribute their wares to the various taverns in the area, ensuring a steady supply of liquid refreshment for the thirsty masses. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of Anheuser-Busch, only with fewer Clydesdales and a lot more questionable hygiene. Fun fact, the word ale comes from the Proto-Germanic alu, meaning, well, ale. Groundbreaking, I know. Now, if you're feeling a little adventurous, and have a few extra coins to spare, you might want to try something a little stronger. Mead, for example. This honey-based wine was a popular choice, especially among the wealthier clientele. Sweet, potent, and surprisingly complex, mead could be flavored with everything from herbs and spices to fruits and flowers. Think of it as the original craft cocktail. Historians still argue whether mead was more popular in certain regions than others, with some claiming it was a staple of Viking culture, while others see it as a more widespread beverage enjoyed across Europe. I'd be hard-pressed to say. What I do know is that the Vikings are always given the credit for everything cool, even if it's not always accurate. Or perhaps you fancy some cider. Made from fermented apples, cider was a common drink in regions where grapes were scarce. It was a refreshing and often cheaper alternative to wine, perfect for quenching your thirst on a hot summer day. And just like wine and beer, cider could vary wildly in quality, depending on the apples used and the skill of the cider maker. Some ciders were sweet and bubbly, while others were dry and tart. Imagine a less fizzy, less sugary version of the apple juice you drank as a kid. Only with alcohol. Of course, we can't forget about spirits. While distillation techniques were still relatively primitive in the early medieval period, stronger liquors were slowly starting to make their appearance. Aqua vitae, or water of life, was the general term for these potent beverages, and they were often used for medicinal purposes as much as for recreational drinking. Imagine a medieval cough syrup, only with a much more pleasant side effect. In fact, the origins of many modern liqueurs can be traced back to these early medicinal concoctions. Who knew that curing your ailments could be so much fun? And here's a quirky little tidbit for you. Did you know that some taverns actually use chalk marks on a slate board to keep track of their customers' tabs? Hence the phrase, chalk it up, meaning to add something to a debt. So, the next time you're feeling a little overextended financially, you can blame it on medieval bar tabs. Just kidding. Sort of. But what about the people who made and served all of these delightful beverages? Well, tavern keepers were a diverse bunch. Some were former soldiers, looking for a new trade after a life of fighting. Others were widows, trying to make a living after losing their husbands. And still others were just folks who enjoyed the company of others and had a knack for keeping a good fire burning. Think of them as the original social entrepreneurs. Serving drinks wasn't always the easiest job, though. You had to deal with unruly customers, spilled drinks, and the occasional bar fight. And let's not forget the constant threat of robbery. Taverns were often targets for thieves, especially if they were known to keep a lot of cash on hand. So, tavern keepers had to be quick on their feet, both mentally and physically. They were often skilled negotiators, able to defuse tense situations with a well-placed joke or a free drink. Although, some say that the free drink was just a clever way to get the troublemaker even more inebriated and easier to deal with. Shrewd, right? So, you see, the tavern wasn't just a place to get a drink. It was a social hub, a meeting place, a refuge from the harsh realities of medieval life. It was a place where you could hear the latest news, gossip with your friends, and maybe even strike a business deal or two. It was a place where you could forget your troubles, at least for a little while. And that, my friend, is something worth raising a glass to. Although, maybe pace yourself. You don't want to end up sleeping in the stables. Trust me, the straw isn't as comfortable as it looks. Right then, friend. Come closer, pull up a stool that doesn't look like it's about to give way, and let's talk food. Glorious, greasy, sometimes questionable food. I know, you're probably thinking, tavern fare. Sounds like stale bread and watered-down ale. And hey, sometimes, it is. But even the lowliest tavern keeper knows that a happy, well-fed patron is a patron who spends more coin. And we like coin, don't we? Just let that thought settle. Clink, 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 nice. First, forget any notions of dainty silverware and elaborate plating. You are not at some fancy elven banquet. We're talking wooden trenchers, maybe a slightly chipped earthenware bowl if you're lucky, and the occasional horn for drinking. The utensils? Usually just your hands. Finger-licking good, as they say, although the cleanliness of said fingers might be debatable. Don't worry about it. Just assume everyone built up a good immune system. Now, imagine the smell, roasting meat mingling with the yeasty aroma of brewing beer, the earthy scent of root vegetables, and just a hint of something vaguely unidentifiable. Let's say it's a unique spice blend. Yeah. Let's start with the basics. Bread. Always bread. It's the staff of life, the filler of bellies, and, let's be honest, sometimes the only thing standing between you and a full-blown drunken brawl fueled by an empty stomach. Now, don't expect anything artisan. We're talking rough-hewn loaves, often made with whatever grains were cheap and available. Maybe some rye, maybe some barley, definitely a bit heavy on the bran. It'll fill you up, all right. And, depending on the establishment, it might be slightly stale, slightly moldy, or slightly petrified. Ah well, builds character. And teeth. Or at least, wears them down nicely. But at least you can be grateful. Did you know that back in the day, bread was so important, that the price of bread was closely controlled and regulated, because social unrest could flare up if people couldn't afford their daily loaf? Wild, right? Next up, meat. Ah, the star of the show. Usually roasted over an open fire, giving it that smoky, slightly charred flavor that just screams tavern. Forget your fancy cuts of filet mignon. We're talking chunks of beef, mutton, pork, maybe even venison if the hunter was feeling generous or desperate. Usually, it was cooked on a spit. Sometimes, you'd get a whole animal rotating on that spit for days and days, and people would come in and get their slices. Now, you might think that was a very hygienic thing to do. Ha! Good one. The seasoning? Simple. Salt, pepper, maybe some herbs if the cook was feeling fancy. Garlic was popular, too. Can't go wrong with garlic, although your breath might clear out a small village afterward. And don't be surprised if it's a bit tough. Or a lot tough. After all, these weren't pampered, grain-fed animals. They were working beasts, providing labor and food, and their muscles reflected that. Chew thoroughly. You might even want to dip it in some gravy, which, let's be real, was probably just watered-down meat drippings thickened with flour. But hey, it adds moisture. And maybe masks the flavor of, well, you know. Now, let's delve into the intriguing world of tavern stews. Ah, yes. The classic catch-all dish. Anything and everything went into the stew pot. Leftover meat, root vegetables, herbs, spices, maybe even a stray boot if it fell in by accident. Okay, maybe not the boot. But you get the idea. It was a way to use up scraps and feed a lot of people cheaply. The flavor? Well, that varied wildly depending on the ingredients. Sometimes it was surprisingly delicious. Sometimes it tasted like, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to ask what exactly went into it. And the consistency? Let's just say that if you could stand a spoon up in it, it was probably a good thing. Maybe. Historically, these stews were called pottages, and it was a dietary staple for basically everyone who wasn't rich. It was cheap, filling, and nutritious, or at least, it could be nutritious. Unless the tavern cook had a particularly heavy hand with the salt. And speaking of ingredients, ever heard of umbles? They were basically the offal, the organ meats, of deer. So, things like the heart, liver, kidneys, and other, less appealing bits. They were often used in pies or stews. Now, I know what you're thinking, ew, gross. But honestly, organ meats can be quite nutritious and flavorful if prepared correctly. Plus, in a time of scarcity, you didn't waste anything. So, next time you're at a tavern, ask for the umble pie. See what happens. Now, vegetables. Ah yes, the oft-forgotten side dish. Root vegetables were the name of the game: turnips, carrots, parsnips, onions. They were hardy, easy to grow, and stored well. Usually, they were boiled or roasted, sometimes with a bit of fat for flavor. Don't expect anything fancy like roasted asparagus with balsamic glaze. We're talking simple, straightforward fare. And don't be surprised if they're a bit earthy. Dirt was just a fact of life back then. But hey, extra fiber. Fish. If your tavern was near a river, lake, or the sea, you might find some fish on the menu. Usually, it was salted or smoked to preserve it, which means it could be intensely salty. Like, drink a gallon of ale afterward, salty. But hey, protein. Sometimes you'd see eels on the menu. And I don't mean those fancy things you get at sushi restaurants. These were more like, overgrown, slimy snakes. Now, let's talk about the drinks. Ale. Ale, ale, and more ale. It was the lifeblood of the tavern. Usually brewed on site, it varied in quality depending on the brewer's skill and the ingredients available. Don't expect anything like the craft beers you get today. We're talking relatively weak, often cloudy, and sometimes sour. But it was cheap, plentiful, and did the job. Plus, it was safer to drink than water, which was often contaminated. Wine was available, too, but usually only for the wealthier patrons. Mead, a honey-based drink, was also popular, especially in colder regions. Think of it as a medieval energy drink. And of course, there was always water. But, as mentioned before, drink at your own risk. Although, on that subject, historians still argue whether ale was consumed so widely because the water was bad, or because people just liked the taste of ale. And what about dessert? Well, let's just say it wasn't a priority. Maybe some fruit if it was in season. Or a simple honey cake. Or, if you were really lucky, a pie filled with whatever fruit was available. Think of it as a bonus, not an expectation. But I've gotta say, if there was a dessert to look out for, it'd be something like frumenty. Basically, it's this dish of boiled wheat, milk, and spices, sometimes sweetened with honey. It's often served thick, almost like porridge. It sounds kinda bland, but when it's done right, it's actually pretty comforting. Tavern dining customs were pretty simple. You grabbed a seat wherever you could find one, ordered your food and drink, and ate. Loudly. No need for polite conversation or fancy etiquette. Just chow down and enjoy, or endure, the experience. Spilling, burping, and other unseemly noises were pretty much par for the course. Think of it as a communal eating experience, where personal space was a mere suggestion. So, loosen your belt, prepare your digestive system, and get ready for a feast. Or at least, a filling meal. And remember, whatever you do, don't ask what's really in the stew. Some things are best left unknown. Okay, before I do let you go for the night, I have to drop one more bit of knowledge on you, sop. Literally bread that's been dunked in a liquid. You might think of it as a sort of early crouton, but think bigger. Imagine soaking hunks of bread in wine, ale, or even, broth. It sounds awful, but it was actually eaten by everyone from peasants to royalty. I'm getting sleepy just thinking about all this food. I hope you enjoyed your little tour of tavern dining. Just one more thing, a quick note for the road: if you ever happen to be sharing a communal drinking horn, make sure to wipe the rim, or, at least pretend to. Okay, that's all for me. Good night. You settle a little deeper into your worn wooden stool, the familiar creak a comforting sound in the ever-present tavern clamor. The ale you nurse is, well, it's ale. Let's just say subtlety isn't exactly a brewer's top priority around these parts. But it's wet, vaguely alcoholic, and chases away the lingering chill from the forest, so you're not complaining. Not out loud, anyway. Around you, the tavern buzzes not just with idle chatter and off-key singing, but with the unmistakable hum of commerce. This isn't just a place to drown your sorrows or swap tall tales, it's a bustling economic hub, a miniature stock exchange fueled by grog and grudges. You observe a farmer, his face weathered like an old saddle, haggling with a fur trader over the price of a particularly plump rabbit pelt. Beside them, a pair of merchants are meticulously examining bolts of brightly dyed cloth, muttering about tariffs and trade routes. The tavern, you see, fills a crucial gap in the medieval economy. It's a centralized location where buyers and sellers can connect, display their wares, or at least describe them in colorful detail, and hammer out deals. In a world without eBay or Amazon, this is your local equivalent of a global marketplace. Sure, you might get ripped off occasionally by a particularly silver-tongued rogue, but hey, that's just the cost of doing business. Consider it a medieval transaction fee. It was a far cry from the highly structured markets we think of today. Think of it as more like a pop-up shop, only instead of artisanal soaps and overpriced coffee, you have livestock, textiles, and potentially questionable potions. It's all very organic, very chaotic, and surprisingly effective. And beyond mere trade, the tavern also functions as a primitive banking system. Need to borrow some coin for a new plow? The local moneylender, usually a shrewd individual with a permanent squint and an unnerving fascination with fingernails, holds court in a shadowy corner, ready to offer loans at rates that would make a modern payday lender blush. Need to deposit your hard-earned silver before bandits relieve you of it on the road home? The innkeeper, often the most trusted, or at least the least overtly dishonest, person in town, can safeguard your valuables in a sturdy chest behind the bar. It's all very informal, based more on personal relationships and reputation than legal contracts, but it works, most of the time. Just remember to count your fingers after shaking hands on any deal. After all, the history of banking is longer and weirder than most realize. The Sumerians were using clay tablets to record loans as far back as 3000 BC. And, while we're on the subject of weird financial history, did you know that in 1637, during the peak of tulip mania, in the Netherlands, some single tulip bulbs were worth more than houses? Honestly, people losing their minds over crypto doesn't seem so odd in comparison. Now, you watch as a group of traveling entertainers unpack their instruments near the fireplace. A lute, a rather battered-looking fiddle, and a set of pipes that seem to be held together with more hope than glue. They're clearly hoping to earn a few coins for their efforts, and the innkeeper, ever the shrewd businessman, is likely considering what cut he'll demand from their earnings. The entertainment, of course, serves a dual purpose. It draws in customers, keeps them drinking, and ultimately, fuels the tavern's economic engine. The tavern isn't just a place of trade, it's a center of information. Travelers, merchants, and even the occasional wandering scholar bring news from far and wide, spreading rumors, gossip, and vital information about market conditions, political intrigues, and the ever-present threat of bandits. Need to know if the price of wool has dropped in the neighboring kingdom? The tavern is your Reuters news agency, albeit one fueled by mead and tall tales. And speaking of news, the news of the day, such as it is, seems to involve a dispute over fishing rights on the river that runs through the valley. You overhear snippets of conversation, angry shouts about nets and quotas and accusations of poaching. It's a microcosm of larger political conflicts, played out on a smaller, more personal scale. The river, after all, is more than just a source of fish, it's a lifeline for the entire community. And if the river dies, so does the economy. It's all rather human. All the petty squabbles, the grand ambitions, the desperate need to make a living in a harsh world. The tavern, you realize, is more than just a building, it's a reflection of the society around it. A mirror, albeit a slightly warped and beer-stained one. Historians still argue whether the rise of the tavern was a cause or a consequence of economic growth in the medieval period. Was it the increasing trade and commerce that led to the proliferation of taverns, or was it the taverns themselves that fostered economic activity by providing a central meeting place and a hub for information exchange? It's a chicken and egg scenario, really. One thing is certain, though, the tavern and the economy were inextricably linked. Like a particularly potent ale and a regrettable decision. You feel someone bump your shoulder, and turn to see a wiry little man with darting eyes and a nervous twitch. He flashes you a toothy grin, mostly teeth, really, and gestures towards a small pouch he's holding. "Finest herbs this side of the mountains, friend," he whispers conspiratorially. "Guaranteed to cure what ails you." You raise a skeptical eyebrow. "Cure what ails me, eh? Like, say, a crippling addiction to Tavern Alesh?" He chuckles nervously. "Well, maybe not that. But it's good for, headaches. And, bad breath." You can't help but smile. He reminds you of those guys selling knockoff Rolexes out of a trench coat, except instead of watches, it's dried weeds and questionable promises. You politely decline his offer, you're not entirely sure what's in that pouch, and frankly, you're not sure you want to know. But you do appreciate the reminder that even in a seemingly simple setting like a tavern, there's a constant undercurrent of entrepreneurial spirit. People are always looking for ways to make a buck, to improve their lot in life, even if it means peddling dubious herbs to unsuspecting customers. It's the engine of progress, or at least the engine of slightly less drab than usual existence. Taking another sip of your ale, you notice a group of scribes hunched over a table in the corner, their quill pens scratching furiously across parchment. They're drafting contracts, recording transactions, and generally keeping track of the endless flow of goods and services that pass through the tavern's doors. Without them, the whole system would grind to a halt. They are the unsung heroes of the medieval economy, the number crunchers and record keepers who make sure that the wheels of commerce keep turning. They're basically the medieval equivalent of Excel spreadsheets, only much, much messier and prone to ink stains. Honestly, when you think about it, the tavern is a pretty remarkable place. It's a microcosm of the wider world, a place where all walks of life converge, where fortunes are made and lost, and where the fate of kingdoms can be decided over a mug of ale. It's a place of both immense opportunity and crushing disappointment, of shrewd business deals and outright scams. It's a place of laughter and tears, of hope and despair. It's life, really. Just served with a generous helping of mead and questionable stew. And maybe a few tulip bulbs for good measure. You trudge along the cobblestone street, the chill evening air nipping at your cheeks. Another day bites the dust, another mountain of paperwork, or whatever medieval equivalent you've got going on, conquered. You deserve a break. And where does one go for a break in this, vaguely historical feeling setting we find ourselves in? Why, the tavern, of course. The flickering lamplight spills out from the doorway, promising warmth and, hopefully, something vaguely alcoholic. You push open the heavy wooden door, the hinges groaning in protest, a sound that somehow manages to be both welcoming and ominous at the same time. The smell of roasted meat, stale beer, and unwashed bodies washes over you. Ah, home sweet home. Or, at least, home sweet temporary escape. The tavern is bustling. Rough-looking men with beards that could house small birds are huddled around tables, rolling dice and exchanging boisterous laughter. A bard strums a lute in a corner, singing a ballad about a dragon who apparently had a crippling fear of squirrels. You snag an empty stool at the bar, which, surprisingly, isn't sticky. Progress. You signal the barkeep, a burly fellow with a perpetually unimpressed expression. He saunters over, wiping down the already clean counter with a rag that probably hasn't seen soap in this century. "What'll it be?" he grunts, his voice like gravel gargling with mead. "Something strong," you reply. "And maybe, a story." He raises a skeptical eyebrow but pours you a generous tankard of something dark and frothy. "Stories are extra," he says, sliding the tankard across the counter. "Information ain't free, you know." You take a long sip. It tastes earthy. And vaguely of feet. But it's strong, all right. "All right," you say. "Lay it on me. What's the gossip tonight?" He leans in conspiratorially. "Heard old man Hemlock found a shiny rock in his field. Says it's a dragon scale. Probably just fool's gold, if you ask me. Hemlock's been sniffin' too much of his own fertilizer." You chuckle. Classic small-town drama. But taverns weren't just places for exchanging tall tales and farm gossip. They were the information superhighways of their time. The very first internet, but with more spilled ale and fewer cat videos. Think about it. Before printing presses were common, before newspapers, before carrier pigeons with tiny spectacles reading news headlines, taverns were the place where news, rumors, and pronouncements spread like wildfire. Travelers would stop by, bringing news from distant lands. Merchants would boast about their latest deals. Soldiers would recount their battles, with, let's be honest, probably some embellishment. In fact, historians still argue whether the concentration of taverns in London actually fueled revolutionary sentiment in the years leading up to the English Civil War. These establishments provided fertile ground for discussing politics, disseminating pamphlets, often seditious ones, and plotting against the crown. Imagine trying to overthrow a government over a pint of lukewarm ale. It sounds surprisingly appealing, actually. And it wasn't just political upheaval brewing in these establishments. They were also centers for trade, legal proceedings, and even scientific discussions. Some taverns even served as makeshift courthouses, where local disputes were settled over a jug of wine. Forget Judge Judy, picture a judge with a beer belly and a stained tunic, banging his gavel, which is probably just a wooden spoon, on the table. Speaking of trouble, the barkeep continues, snapping you back to the present. "Heard the king's men are lookin' for deserters. Supposedly, they're hidin' out in the forest. Keep your nose clean, friend." You nod, taking another swig of the feet-flavored ale. It's growing on you. Maybe. The tavern atmosphere is certainly helping. The bard has moved on to a song about a lovelorn goblin, which is surprisingly catchy. You glance around the room, taking in the scene. This isn't just a random collection of individuals, it's a community. A temporary one, perhaps, but a community nonetheless. They're sharing stories, sharing drinks, sharing, possibly diseases, depending on the hygiene standards of the era. But hey, nobody's perfect. Did you know that in some parts of medieval Europe, it was considered perfectly acceptable, even polite, to share a communal drinking vessel? That's right, everyone would drink from the same cup. Think about that the next time you hesitate to double-dip your chip. It's all relative, isn't it? It's like the ultimate germ-sharing circle of trust. Or maybe not trust, more like desperation in the face of questionable water sources. The barkeep wipes down the counter again, this time with slightly more enthusiasm. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he says. "What's on your mind?" "Just pondering the unique sanitation practices of the past," you reply. He shrugs. "Don't knock it till you try it. Builds character and immunity. Probably." He pauses. Want another one of these foot-flavored delights? You hesitate. Maybe just a small one. He pours you a smaller tankard, this time from a different barrel. This one smells faintly of apples. A definite improvement. As you sip your apple-infused beverage, you overhear a conversation at the next table. Two men are arguing about the best way to cure hiccups. One swears by holding your breath and counting to 10, classic, while the other insists that you need to be scared by a goat. A goat. Apparently, a sudden jolt of fear will reset your diaphragm. You're not entirely sure how that works, but you're willing to entertain the possibility. Desperate times, desperate measures, and all that. Taverns weren't just about information, they were about entertainment. Gambling, games, music, and, of course, storytelling. The stories themselves often evolved with each telling, becoming increasingly fantastical and embellished. It's like a medieval version of the telephone game, but with dragons and knights instead of gossip about Brenda from accounting. The barkeep clears his throat, leaning in again. Heard another rumor, he says. This one's about the witch in the woods. They say she can turn men into frogs. You raise an eyebrow. Frogs, huh? Is that all? I was hoping for something more dramatic. Like, turning them into slightly less annoying versions of themselves. He chuckles. You got a sharp tongue, friend. Be careful who you say that to. Someone might turn you into a frog. You take another sip of your ale, considering the possibility. Being a frog wouldn't be all bad. You could eat flies, swim in ponds, and croak at the moon. Plus, no more paperwork. Tempting, very tempting. But for now, you're content to stay right here, in this dimly lit, slightly smelly, but undeniably captivating tavern. The gossip swirls around you, the music fills your ears, and the ale warms your belly. It's not a perfect life, but it's a life. And sometimes, that's all you need. You think about all the historical figures who probably spent countless hours in taverns just like this one. Shakespeare, perhaps, brainstorming plot ideas over a pint of ale. Queen Elizabeth I, maybe sneaking in for a quick one after a particularly stressful day of ruling the country. Okay, probably not the Queen, but you get the idea. There's a certain timelessness to the tavern experience. A sense of connection to the past, a feeling that you're participating in something ancient and universal. The need for companionship, for relaxation, for a good story, these things haven't changed much over the centuries. Now, some historians even suggest that the widespread availability of alcoholic beverages in medieval Europe actually contributed to public health. Wait, what? It's a fringe theory, sure, but the argument goes that beer and wine, while not exactly health elixirs, were often safer to drink than the local water supply, which was frequently contaminated with, well, you don't want to know. So, cheers to that. The night wears on, the tavern slowly emptying as the hours tick by. The bard packs up his loot, the gamblers count their winnings, or lick their wounds, and the barkeep begins to stack the tankards. You finish your ale, feeling a pleasant buzz settling in. It's time to head back to your thatched roof cottage, castle, cardboard box. Whatever your medieval accommodation situation may be. You thank the barkeep, tossing a few coins onto the counter. He nods curtly, already moving on to the next customer. As you step back out into the cool night air, you can still hear the faint sounds of laughter and music drifting from the tavern. You smile. The gossip mill will keep turning, the stories will keep flowing, and the tavern will be there, waiting, for you to return. After all, where else would you get your daily dose of rumors, questionable beverages, and existential pondering? You trudge through the heavy oak doors of the rusty flagon, the tavern's brass hinges groaning a mournful welcome. The smell hits you first, a heady mix of stale beer, roasting meat, and something vaguely unwashed. It's an olfactory tapestry woven from the lives of countless patrons, a perfume that clings to the very timbers of the place. Ah, the romance of history. Honestly, the air in here is thicker than a dwarf's beard. You can practically taste the humidity, a clammy film settling on your skin as you step further inside. The light is dim, filtered through grime-coated windows, casting long, dancing shadows that flicker across the rough-hewn tables. It's like stepping into a Rembrandt painting, only less Dutch. And probably smellier. You scan the room, and the social stratification, as the scholars so delicately put it, is immediately obvious. Over in the corner, by the roaring hearth, you see a cluster of men in sturdy leather armor, their faces weathered and scarred. Mercenaries, most likely, judging by the way they eye everyone else in the room. They're throwing dice and swapping boasts, their laughter loud and boisterous, fueled by cheap ale and the promise of a bloody tomorrow. You wouldn't want to be on the wrong end of their table tab. You suspect their definition of tip involves a blunt instrument. Further back, near the kitchens, a group of laborers huddle, their clothes stained with dirt and sweat. They speak in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously towards the larger, more boisterous groups. Their mugs are smaller, their smiles more hesitant. They look like they just clocked out of hard labor, and the only way they'll be getting hammered tonight is by watching someone else get hammered. It's a tough life, digging ditches, and the rusty flagon probably is the best way to de-stress. Though you're pretty sure you could come up with some other, less beer-smelling, ideas. And then, over by the raised platform where a lute player is strumming a melancholic tune, you see a figure draped in fine silks and velvet. A merchant, perhaps, or a minor noble slumming it for a bit of authentic experience. They sip delicately from a goblet, their nose crinkling slightly at the less-than refined atmosphere. They look about as comfortable as a cat in a bathtub. Probably should have hit the royal gardens for a party. You think about history and how, during the medieval period, sumptuary laws dictated what people could wear based on their social standing. Imagine, a world where you'd get fined for rocking a purple tunic if you weren't royalty. Talk about fashion police. Can you believe that actually happened? Navigating through the throng, you notice the server, a young woman with tired eyes and a perpetual air of weary resignation. She expertly weaves her way through the crowd, balancing a precarious stack of mugs on a wooden tray. Honestly, she's probably got the arm strength of an Olympic weightlifter. She ignores the drunken catcalls and crude jokes with the practiced ease of someone who's heard it all before. Someone should give her a medal for dealing with this crowd every night, I'm just saying. I bet she has a lot of stories she could tell. Speaking of stories, the lute player, a wizened old man with a twinkle in his eye, launches into a ballad. It's a tale of brave knights, damsels in distress, and dragons guarding hoards of gold. It's the kind of story that's been told and retold for centuries, a comforting blend of myth and morality. But it's also a reflection of the social values of the time, reinforcing the importance of honor, courage, and obedience to one's superiors. You notice a few of the laborers perk up at the song's melody, the sound soothing their weary bodies. Did you know that many of these ballads were actually used to spread news and information in a time when literacy was limited? Basically, they were the medieval equivalent of the evening news, except with more dragons and less political commentary. Historians still argue whether these songs were accurate reflections of reality or simply idealized fantasies. Were knights really that chivalrous? Were dragons really that common? We may never know the truth. But hey, at least the songs are catchy. The lute player's song reminds you of a fringe theory you once heard, which is that the mythical dragons of the medieval era were actually just exaggerated accounts of crocodiles brought back to Europe after expeditions to Africa and the Middle East. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, a crocodile is pretty scary. As you settle into a relatively clean corner, relatively being the key word, you order a tankard of ale. The server sighs as she takes your order, but you catch a fleeting glimpse of a smile as she moves away. Maybe she appreciates the fact that you didn't try to pinch her backside. It's the little things in life. The ale arrives, frothy and lukewarm, and you take a tentative sip. It tastes vaguely of apples and regret. But hey, it's ale, right? And it's wet. That's all that really matters. Honestly, It kind of makes you want to pass out, but I digress. You watch the interactions around you, the ebb and flow of conversations, the clinking of mugs, the occasional outburst of laughter or anger. It's a microcosm of society, a messy, imperfect, and strangely compelling reflection of human nature. Here, in this dimly lit tavern, the lines between classes blur ever so slightly, as people from all walks of life come together to share a drink, a story, and a brief respite from the harsh realities of their world. You see the merchant, looking increasingly uncomfortable, trying to haggle with one of the mercenaries over the price of a stolen artifact. The laborer from earlier won a dice game, so now he's buying shots for his friends. At least, that's what it looks like. You're not entirely sure what's going on. People are having fun, and that's pretty much all that matters. The bell above the door jingles, announcing the arrival of new patrons. A group of traveling merchants, judging by their dusty cloaks and laden pack animals, stumble in, seeking shelter and refreshment. They add another layer to the already complex tapestry of social interactions, bringing with them new stories, new goods, and new perspectives. And you, sitting here in your corner, are just another thread in that tapestry, observing, reflecting, and occasionally chuckling to yourself. It's a scene that's played out countless times throughout history, a timeless tableau of humanity at its most basic, its most flawed, and its most interesting. The Rusty Flagon is a place where all are welcome. Or, at least, all with enough money to buy a drink. You notice that the mercenary from earlier is now using his helmet to collect ale. He really should clean it. You reflect on the fact that the first instance of a tavern-like establishment dates back to ancient Mesopotamia. That's right, people have been getting together to drink and tell tall tales for thousands of years. So, in a way, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back to the very dawn of civilization. Feels good, right? I mean, you might as well make the most of it. Get yourself another drink. I am getting sleepy, though, maybe you should order it. Alright, settle in, settle in. Comfy yet? Good. Because you're about to enter a world of flashing lights, the clatter of chips, and the faint scent of desperation mixed with cheap cologne. You're smack dab in the middle of the entertainment and gambling district. And trust me, honey, it's a trip. You trudge past neon signs advertising everything from high-stakes poker tournaments to, well, let's just call them exotic performances. The air vibrates with a low thrum, a cocktail of arcade noises, shouting, and the rhythmic kaching of slot machines. You can practically taste the anticipation hanging thick in the air, a sticky, sweet, almost cloying confection. First things first, let's get one thing straight, gambling isn't new. Not even close. Back in ancient Rome, soldiers used to gamble with dice, often wagering their very meager paychecks. Can you imagine? Risking starvation for a chance to win, well, more food, probably. Talk about a high-stakes diet plan. And speaking of Romans, did you know they even had a sort of lottery system? It was during the reign of Augustus, and the proceeds were used to fund public works. So, next time you grumble about taxes, just remember, at least you're not entering a lottery where the prize is a functioning aqueduct. Historians still argue whether gambling was truly widespread amongst all levels of Roman society or if it was largely confined to soldiers and the wealthy elite. It's a debate that probably won't be settled anytime soon, much like the debate over whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. But you're not in ancient Rome now, are you? You're here, in this glittering, cacophonous, thoroughly modern den of chance. You sidestep a group of giggling tourists trying to navigate a roulette table, their eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and complete bewilderment. You can practically feel their wallets trembling. You wander past a bustling arcade, the air thick with the smell of popcorn and the shrieks of children obliterating digital aliens. You can't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for those pixelated worlds. Remember the days when all you needed to be entertained was a joystick and an insatiable hunger for high scores? Ah, simpler times. Before the internet ruined everything, and also made all of this possible. And then there are the skill games. Claw machines filled with plush toys that are suspiciously difficult to grab. Water gun races where the prize is a giant inflatable banana. It's all designed to separate you from your money, one brightly colored bauble at a time. And yet, you can't deny the appeal. There's something inherently satisfying about the challenge, the illusion of control in a world that feels increasingly out of your hands. Did you know that the first mechanical slot machine, the Liberty Bell, was invented in the late 19th century by a car mechanic named Charles Fay? Talk about a career change. He probably just wanted a more reliable way to lose his paycheck than betting on horse races. Now, here's a quirky little fact for you. There's a persistent rumor that some arcades rig their claw machines to only grip tightly a certain percentage of the time. It's a classic urban legend, and while there's no definitive proof, you can't help but wonder if there's a tiny shred of truth to it. Maybe the claws are sentient and just enjoy messing with us. Historians still argue whether such practices are widespread and legally sanctioned, or if they are largely confined to individual arcade owners bending the rules. Either way, you'd probably have better luck trying to win the lottery than grabbing that giant Pikachu. You move on, drawn by the hypnotic pull of the casinos. The plush carpets swallow your footsteps as you enter a vast, windowless room bathed in the warm glow of chandeliers and the cool flicker of slot machines. Time seems to lose all meaning in here. It's always night, always time to play. You watch as a woman in a sequin dress throws a handful of chips onto a roulette table, her face a mask of intense concentration. A man in a suit sips a martini, his eyes glued to a poker game unfolding at a nearby table. The air crackles with tension, a silent battle waged between luck and strategy. Casinos, of course, have a long and storied history. They can be traced back to 17th century Italy, where they were initially designed as social clubs for the wealthy elite. Over time, they evolved into the elaborate, multifaceted entertainment complexes you see today. And here's a little something for your brain: the first casino in Venice, Italy, called the Casino di Venezia, is still open today. Granted, it's probably been remodeled a few times since the 1600s, but still, that's a pretty impressive run. Imagine all the stories those walls could tell, if they weren't too busy listening to the incessant ringing of slot machines. Historians still argue whether the rise of casinos represented a genuine shift in societal attitudes towards gambling, or simply a more formalized and regulated version of pre-existing practices. Whatever the case, it's clear that casinos have become a permanent fixture of modern culture. You feel a tap on your shoulder. A man with a handlebar mustache and a mischievous glint in his eye gestures towards a back room. A sign above the door reads, "High rollers only." Intriguing. Tempting. But also, probably a very bad idea. You politely decline and continue your exploration, drawn towards a quieter corner of the entertainment district. You stumble upon a small, dimly lit theater, its marquee advertising a magic show. Now that's more your speed. You step inside, the air thick with the scent of stale popcorn and cheap perfume. A handful of people are scattered throughout the audience, their faces illuminated by the glow of the stage. A lone spotlight shines on a velvet curtain, hinting at the wonders to come. Magic, of course, has been around for centuries. From ancient Egyptians performing illusions for the pharaohs to medieval street performers captivating crowds with sleight of hand, magic has always held a certain allure. And speaking of ancient magic, did you know that the oldest documented magic trick is called the cups and balls? It dates back to ancient Egypt and involves, well, cups and balls. The magician makes the balls disappear and reappear under the cups, baffling the audience with their seemingly impossible feats. It's a trick that has been performed for thousands of years, passed down from generation to generation of illusionists. You've probably seen it done at a kid's birthday party. Historians still argue whether early magic was viewed as genuine supernatural power, or simply as a form of entertainment. Regardless, it's clear that magic has played a significant role in human culture for millennia. The curtain rises, revealing a man in a tuxedo and a slightly unsettling smile. He introduces himself as the Great Alberto, and promises to astound you with his incredible feats of illusion. He starts with a classic card trick, pulling aces out of thin air. Then he makes a dove appear from nowhere. He even levitates a volunteer from the audience. It's all a bit cheesy, a bit predictable, but undeniably entertaining. But then, he brings out the big guns. He calls for a volunteer for the sawing a person in half trick. You shrink back in your seat, hoping he doesn't pick you. Luckily, someone else is brave, or foolish, enough to step forward. The great Alberto straps the volunteer into a large wooden box, then pulls out a giant saw. The audience gasps. The tension is palpable. He begins to saw. Okay, I'm just kidding. It's a magic trick, of course. The volunteer emerges unharmed, everyone applauds, and you breathe a sigh of relief. You even clap politely, even though you spent the whole time wondering how the trick was done. Probably mirrors. Or tiny, well-trained hamsters. As you leave the theater, you can't help but feel a little bit lighter, a little bit more entertained. This district might be a den of vice and temptation, but it's also a place where anything can happen. A place where dreams are made, and wallets are emptied. It's a place where you can escape the mundane and lose yourself in the thrill of the game. And sometimes, that's exactly what you need. Well, maybe after a little nap. Alright, settle in, friend. Let the gentle crackle of the hearth soothe your weary soul. You trudge into the tavern, the scent of roasted meat and spilled ale already wrapping around you like a warm, slightly sticky blanket. You feel the weight of the day, whatever grim adventures it held, begin to ease ever so slightly. And what do you hear? Not just the boisterous laughter and drunken ramblings, but music. Glorious, slightly off-key, occasionally rousing music. Think about it, what's a tavern without a tune? Like a goblin without a grudge, it just doesn't quite compute. Music is the soul of the establishment, the lubricant that keeps the conversation flowing, even when the ale has started to slur the syllables. You see a lute player strumming away in the corner, fingers flying over the frets, coaxing out a melody that's both familiar and just a tad bit melancholic. Maybe a few patrons are clapping along, slightly out of sync, completely unconcerned with their lack of rhythm. That's tavern life, baby. Throughout history, music has always been a companion to good times, and bad, let's be honest. I mean, even the ancient Romans, known for their military might and impressive plumbing, understood the power of music to create an atmosphere. They had musicians at their banquets, playing pipes and lyres, creating a vibe, which, granted, probably involved a lot more togas and less spilled ale. But back to your present, hypothetical, tavern experience. Observe the performers. It might be a solo bard, a traveling minstrel, or even a full-blown band crammed onto a makeshift stage. Some of them are probably quite good, classically trained even. Others, well, let's just say their enthusiasm outweighs their talent. You notice the slightly pained expression on the face of the barmaid as the lute player hits a particularly sour note during a ballad about a lost love. But hey, he's trying, right? And besides, who needs perfect pitch when you've got a pint of ale to dull the senses? You wonder if he gets extra tips for sheer audacity. And it's not just about the professionals, mind you. Often, the best tavern music comes from the patrons themselves. A spontaneous sing-along breaks out after a few too many rounds of dwarven stout. A group of soldiers, fresh from a victorious, or perhaps not so victorious, battle, start pounding on the tables and bellowing out a drinking song. A traveling merchant with a surprisingly good tenor voice regales the crowd with a ballad about the perils of crossing the Serpent's Pass. You lean back, smile a bit, and savor the moment, realizing you just heard a better song than anything on the radio this week. What do you call a fish with no eyes? FSH. This sense of community, this shared experience of music and merriment, is what makes taverns so special. It's a place where social barriers break down, where strangers become friends, or at least drinking buddies, and where even the most seasoned adventurer can let their guard down for a while. You see a grizzled warrior, face etched with the scars of countless battles, tapping his foot along to the music, a faint smile playing on his lips. Even he needs a break from the monster slaying, a chance to unwind and forget the horrors he's seen. Now, something you might find interesting is that the kind of music played in taverns has varied wildly throughout history, depending on the region, the social class of the patrons, and the prevailing musical tastes of the time. You might hear traditional folk songs, bawdy ballads, even snippets of classical music being butchered for the amusement of the crowd. In some taverns, particularly those frequented by the upper classes, you might even find more formal performances, with musicians playing intricate compositions on harpsichords or viols. But the common thread is always the same: music that's meant to be enjoyed, to be shared, to be sung along to, regardless of your musical ability, or lack thereof. You observe a small group of patrons attempting a complex dance routine. It's not going well. There's a lot of stumbling, missed steps, and suppressed giggles. But they're having fun, and that's all that matters. You sip your ale, a small smile playing on your lips. Who cares if they look like a herd of drunken goblins trying to waltz? They're enjoying themselves, and that's what tavern life is all about. Historians still argue whether certain types of tavern entertainment, like dancing, were considered morally acceptable in all periods. Some religious authorities frowned upon such displays of frivolity, seeing them as a distraction from more pious pursuits. Others, however, recognized the social value of taverns and their role in fostering community spirit, even if that spirit was occasionally fueled by copious amounts of alcohol. Adding to the vibrancy, you might stumble into a tavern during a special performance. Imagine a traveling theater troupe putting on a raucous comedy, complete with exaggerated costumes, slapstick humor, and plenty of audience participation. Or perhaps a skilled storyteller weaving tales of daring adventures, mythical creatures, and long-lost kingdoms. These performances were a vital source of entertainment for people who might not have access to books or other forms of cultural enrichment. Before Netflix, there were bards, and honestly, the bards probably had better writing. Speaking of stories, you might overhear someone recounting a particularly tall tale, embellished with each retelling until it bears little resemblance to the truth. Like that one time I tried to make sourdough bread, and it turned into a sentient blob, but I digress. But these stories, these legends, these outright lies, are all part of the tavern experience. They're a way to pass the time, to entertain the crowd, and to create a sense of shared history and mythology. I walked into a zoo that only had one dog in it. It was a Shih Tzu. Don't forget the games. Many taverns had games of chance or skill to keep their patrons entertained. Dice games, card games, even simple board games like checkers or chess were popular distractions. These games could be a source of friendly competition, a way to win, or lose, a few coins, or just a reason to spend more time in the warm, convivial atmosphere of the tavern. Just try not to get swindled by a dodgy gambler. You see a game of dice going on in a corner. The stakes seem to be getting higher with each roll. You resist the urge to join in, remembering your last disastrous attempt at gambling. Here's a quirk: in some medieval taverns, they used to keep a score for each customer's drinks, not on paper, but by physically chalking up marks on a slate board. It's a primitive but effective form of accounting. You watch a juggler come into the tavern. He is really good, with the crowd going wild as he adds flaming torches to his routine. You feel the temperature increase as the tavern becomes filled with smoke and cheers. I wonder if he got his start doing campfires as a Boy Scout. You settle deeper into your chair, the music washing over you, the laughter echoing in your ears. The world outside, with its worries and troubles, seems far away. For a brief moment, you are simply present, enjoying the company of strangers, the warmth of the fire, and the magic of the tavern. As you finish the last of your ale, you prepare yourself for the outside world again. Just maybe, you can take this feeling with you. Alright, friend, settle in. Let's talk about something a little less comforting than foamy alesh and roaring fires. We're dipping our toes into the seedy underbelly of tavern life. Crime, policing, and the legal headaches that plague these otherwise joyous establishments. Cozy, right? Don't worry, I'll keep the mood light. You trudge through the mud-slicked street, the flickering lamplight painting long, distorted shadows ahead. The tavern, the Rusty Flagon, is your destination. You can hear the muffled shouts and the off-key singing already. But before you even push open the door, consider this: taverns, throughout history, have been magnets for less than savory characters. It's a pretty straightforward equation: alcohol plus crowded space plus readily available cash equals temptation. Think about it: wallets loosened by drink, gossip freely exchanged, deals struck in hushed tones, opportunities abound for pickpockets, swindlers, and the occasional outright thug. In medieval England, for instance, alehouses were frequently cited in court records as sites of brawls, petty theft, and even more serious crimes. You see, the local constable, bless his heart, couldn't be everywhere at once. And even when he was around, his powers were often limited. Speaking of constables, did you know that in some medieval towns, the position of ale taster was a real job? Someone was actually paid to sample the local brews and ensure they weren't watered down or, worse, poisoned. Talk about job security. Now, you push open the door to the Rusty Flagon, and the wave of warm air, boisterous laughter, and the mingled sense of stale beer and roasted meat washes over you. It's a sensory overload, but you immediately notice a couple of shifty-looking individuals lurking in the shadows. One has a hand suspiciously close to the purse of a portly merchant. You decide to subtly move closer to the bar. Safer territory, hopefully. It's not just petty theft you'd be worried about, you know. In many historical periods, taverns were also hubs for more organized criminal activity. Smugglers would use them as meeting places, highwaymen would plan their heists over a tankard of ale, and even political conspirators would hatch their plots within these seemingly innocuous walls. Historians still argue whether the gunpowder plot, that famous attempt to blow up the British Parliament, was truly conceived in a tavern, but the idea is certainly tempting. And don't forget about gambling. Dice games, card games, all fueled by liquid courage, were rife with opportunities for cheating and disputes. Imagine losing your life savings, or worse, owing a hefty sum, to a ruthless gambler in a dimly lit tavern. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, doesn't it? You order a pint of the local brew, trying to look nonchalant as you observe the room. A group of sailors are engaged in a raucous game of dice, their voices growing louder with each roll. One of them accuses another of cheating, and a heated argument ensues. You discreetly signal the barkeep, a burly man with a handlebar mustache, that things might be about to escalate. He nods grimly, reaching for a rather formidable-looking club he keeps under the counter. Good. Policing in these taverns was a tricky business. There wasn't exactly a modern police force patrolling the streets. It often fell to the tavern owner to maintain order, relying on his own strength, the help of loyal patrons, or, in some cases, calling on the local watch. This watch was often just a rotating group of citizens who took turns patrolling the streets at night, armed with little more than a lantern and a whistle. Think of them as a neighborhood watch, but with significantly less training and significantly more opportunities for corruption. Speaking of corruption, there are stories of tavern owners paying off local officials to turn a blind eye to illegal activities happening on their premises. A little something for the boys in blue, or, more accurately, the guys in brown tunics. Of course, getting caught doing that was a whole different kettle of fish. But what happens when things did go wrong? What if a fight broke out, someone was injured, or worse? Well, that's where the legal system came into play. You see, different regions had different laws regarding taverns, their responsibilities, and the consequences for any illegal activity that occurred within their walls. And, let's be honest, the legal system wasn't always the most swift in its response. Justice could be slow, unevenly applied, and heavily influenced by social standing. If you were a wealthy merchant who got into a brawl at the tavern, you might get off with a slap on the wrist. If you were a poor peasant, well, things might not go so well for you. You take a sip of your ale, watching as the barkeep diffuses the situation between the sailors with a few well-chosen words and a stern glare. He's clearly seen it all before. The tension in the room dissipates, and the dice game resumes, albeit with slightly less enthusiasm. You breathe a sigh of relief. Crisis averted. For now, anyway. Legal issues weren't just limited to criminal activity, though. Taverns also faced regulations regarding the quality and price of their goods, the hours they could stay open, and even the types of entertainment they could offer. In some places, dancing, music, or even the telling of stories were strictly prohibited. Imagine that. A tavern without music or storytelling. Talk about a buzzkill. And, of course, there were the ever-present concerns about public drunkenness and its consequences. In many historical periods, being found drunk in public was a punishable offense. Imagine having to explain to the judge that you simply had one too many flagons of ale. Good luck with that. The legality of it all rested on maintaining that fine line between being a convivial social space and a den of iniquity. Tavern owners were constantly trying to navigate this delicate balance, trying to keep their patrons happy while avoiding the wrath of the authorities. It was a tough job, but someone had to do it. As the evening wears on, you see the shifty characters slink out of the tavern, presumably to pursue their nefarious activities elsewhere. The sailors finish their game and stumble off into the night, their voices fading into the distance. The barkeep polishes glasses, the fire crackles in the hearth, and a sense of weary contentment settles over the room. Even with all the potential for crime and legal trouble, the tavern remains a place of refuge, a place to escape the hardships of everyday life, if only for a few hours. That's worth something, right? One fringe theory that always tickles me involves fairy rings, those circular patches of grass sometimes found in fields. Some believe that fairies use these rings as portals, and guess where they supposedly go for a nightcap? You guessed it, underground taverns. So, if you ever stumble across a fairy ring, be careful where you step, you might just find yourself crashing a fairy pub crawl. Now that's a legal quagmire I'd pay to see. I should trademark, fairy pub crawl. You finish your ale, feeling a little wiser, a little more aware of the hidden dangers that lurk beneath the surface of even the most inviting establishment. You thank the barkeep, step back out into the night, and begin your journey home, the sounds of the tavern fading behind you. As you walk, you can't help but wonder about the stories these walls could tell, the crimes they've witnessed, the legal battles they've endured. And you realize that the tavern, like any place where people gather, is a microcosm of society itself, with all its joys, its sorrows, and its fair share of law and disorder. Sleep well, friend. You've earned it. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's dim those lights a little. You trudge along this cobblestone street, the chill night air nipping at your exposed ears. It smells faintly of wood smoke and something else. Something a little sweeter, a little heavier, than just dinner cooking in someone's hearth. This isn't quite the idyllic postcard you were expecting, is it? See that flickering gas lamp ahead? It casts long, dancing shadows that seem to writhe with a life of their own. You pull your collar higher, trying to disappear further into the gloom. This part of town wasn't on the official tourist map. Mostly because there weren't tourist maps back then. And also because, well, it wasn't exactly appropriate for Aunt Mildred to be wandering through. You hear it first, a burst of raucous laughter spilling from a doorway, quickly followed by the tinkling of a piano. Then, a snatch of song, off-key and slurred. You pause. Curiosity, that little devil, is starting to tug at your sleeve. That building, the one with the slightly peeling paint and the brightly colored lanterns strung haphazardly across its facade, is one of those establishments. You know, the kind where fortunes are lost, secrets are whispered, and lives are complicated. Historians still argue whether prostitution was more or less prevalent in the 19th century than it is today. Records are spotty, societal attitudes were wildly different, and, of course, people weren't exactly eager to advertise their involvement. But one thing is clear, it was there. Ubiquitous, in fact, in most major cities. It's as much a part of the city's fabric as the sewers running underneath. You can almost smell the cheap perfume clinging to the air, a cloying mixture of roses and something vaguely medicinal. It's a carefully constructed illusion of respectability, masking the reality that lurks within. You notice a couple of men lingering nearby, leaning against the building with a studied nonchalance that screams anything but. They eye you with open appraisal as you approach, and you quickly avert your gaze. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and the murmur of voices. The piano player is pounding out a jaunty tune, and a few couples are attempting to dance in the cramped space. The women are dressed in flamboyant gowns, their faces heavily painted, their laughter a little too loud, a little too brittle. You spot a flash of exposed leg as one of them twirls, and you realize with a start that the respectable facade has crumbled completely within these walls. Over in a corner, a group of men are huddled around a table, throwing dice and slapping cards down with theatrical flair. Money changes hands quickly, and the tension is palpable. You can almost taste the desperation hanging in the air, the unspoken hopes and fears that fuel their reckless gambling. It's a different world in here, isn't it? A world of shadows and secrets, of fleeting pleasures and lasting consequences. A world that operates by its own set of rules, far removed from the polite society that exists just beyond these doors. Here's a little quirky fact for you. Did you know that in some cities, prostitutes were required to wear yellow clothing as a form of public identification? Talk about a scarlet letter, more like a canary yellow one, right? Can you imagine the fashion statements that must have inspired? Yellow, it's the new black. Or, the old, shunned. You notice a woman, sitting alone at the bar. She's older than the others, her face etched with lines that tell a story of hard living. She nurses a glass of something amber, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the crowded room. She doesn't seem to notice you, or anyone else. She's lost in her own world, a world that you can only glimpse from the outside. You feel a tap on your shoulder. You turn to see a man with a neatly trimmed mustache and a sly grin. He's dressed in a velvet waistcoat and his eyes gleam with amusement. Looking for something, friend? He asks, his voice a low murmur. You stammer something about being lost, about taking a wrong turn. He chuckles softly. Lost, are you? Or perhaps, looking to find something? He raises an eyebrow suggestively. You decline, of course, politely but firmly. He shrugs, unfazed. Suit yourself. But be careful out there. This city has a way of swallowing people whole. He gives you a knowing wink and disappears back into the crowd. You take a deep breath and make your way back to the door, eager to escape the stifling atmosphere. As you step back onto the cobblestone street, the cool night air feels like a balm on your skin. But the experience lingers, doesn't it? It leaves a residue of unease, a sense that you've glimpsed something forbidden, something that you weren't meant to see. Remember I mentioned vices? Well, it wasn't just prostitution, mind you. Opium dens were another, popular destination. Imagine this, you're led down a narrow, twisting alleyway, the air thick with the scent of incense and something vaguely sweet and cloying. You duck through a low doorway and find yourself in a dimly lit room filled with reclining figures, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of oil lamps. The silence is broken only by the soft hiss of burning opium and the occasional sigh. These places were often shrouded in secrecy, catering to a clientele that ranged from the wealthy elite to the desperate and downtrodden. It was a world of altered realities, of fleeting escapes from the harsh realities of life. Some people went there to forget, some to dream, and some, tragically, to die. Historians still argue about the social impact of opium use, the extent of its prevalence, and the motivations behind it. Was it a symptom of societal malaise, a form of rebellion against Victorian morality, or simply a way to cope with the stresses of modern life? The answers, like the smoke swirling in those opium dens, are elusive and difficult to grasp. And then there was gambling. From the high-stakes card games in exclusive gentlemen's clubs to the back-alley dice games in the slums, wagering was a pervasive pastime. It was a way to make a quick fortune, to test one's luck, or simply to escape the boredom of everyday life. Of course, for every winner, there were countless losers, men and women who lost everything in their pursuit of fortune. Did you know that lotteries were once used to fund public works projects? A little ironic, isn't it? Using a vice to build a church or a bridge. Hey, let's build a cathedral. With your crushing gambling debts. Ah, the Victorian era, full of contradictions. You continue your walk, your thoughts swirling with images of the scenes you've witnessed. The painted faces, the reckless gamblers, the lost souls seeking solace in oblivion. It's a stark reminder that beneath the veneer of respectability, a darker side of human nature always lurks. As you walk back to your, presumably, respectable hotel, you can't help but wonder about the stories of the people you've encountered. What led them to this world? What were their hopes and dreams? And what, ultimately, will become of them? You find yourself strangely moved by the experience. It's a reminder that life is complex, that morality is often a matter of perspective, and that even in the darkest corners of society, there is still a flicker of humanity to be found. I'll leave you with one more quirky tidbit: some brothels actually employed sobering-up rooms for their clients. Because apparently, buyer's remorse was a thing even back then. I guess even debauchery requires a certain level of professionalism. Sweet dreams, friend. And maybe, just maybe, leave the yellow clothing at home. The dust clings to your worn boots, each particle a tiny testament to the miles you've logged. You squint, the late afternoon sun painting the landscape in hues of ochre and burnt sienna. The air, thankfully, is cooling a bit. It smells of dry grass and, is that wood smoke? Hope flickers in your weary soul, a small flame against the encroaching darkness. You push onward, following the faint trail that's become so familiar, a ribbon of promise in a world of uncertainty. Up ahead, nestled in a copse of trees, a building takes shape. A warm, inviting glow spills from its windows, promising respite from the trials of the road. Traveler's Rest. The name alone is enough to make your shoulders slump with relief. You quicken your pace, imagining a hot meal, a soft bed, and perhaps, just perhaps, a moment of peace. The inn is sturdier than you expected, built from rough-hewn logs and fieldstone. A sign creaks gently above the door, its painted image of a laden pack leaning against a gnarled walking stick a comforting sight. You can almost hear it whispering, "Welcome, weary traveler. And trust me, you are weary. You're so weary, you're pretty sure your bones are plotting a rebellion." You push open the heavy wooden door, and a wave of warmth washes over you, chasing away the chill that's been nipping at your skin. The common room is bustling with activity. A fire crackles merrily in a large hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air is thick with the aroma of roasted meat, freshly baked bread, and something vaguely floral. Potpourri, maybe. Or perhaps someone's just having a really good day and smells naturally delightful. It's hard to say. A motley collection of individuals occupies the tables scattered around the room. Merchants in rumpled finery, soldiers nursing tankards of ale, and farmers with calloused hands, all seeking refuge from the road. The din of conversation is a comforting hum, a reminder that you're not alone in this vast and sometimes hostile world. It's like a medieval airport lounge, but with more mead and less questionable carpet. Behind the long, polished bar stands a man who could only be the innkeeper. He's a burly fellow with a booming laugh and a face weathered like an old map. He's wiping down the counter with a practiced hand, his eyes scanning the room with an air of watchful hospitality. He catches your gaze and gives you a nod. "Welcome to Traveler's Rest." He bellows, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Find yourself a seat, and I'll be right with you." You gratefully sink into a vacant chair near the fire, feeling the heat seep into your aching muscles. You notice a chessboard tucked away on a corner table, the pieces carefully arranged mid-game. Maybe you'll challenge someone later. Provided you don't fall asleep face first into your stew. The innkeeper, whose name you later learn is Barnaby, approaches you with a friendly smile. "What can I get for you, friend? A drink? A bite to eat? Or perhaps a room for the night?" All of the above, you reply, your voice a little hoarse from disuse. A room, definitely. And something hot. Something, sustaining. Barnaby chuckles. I hear you. I've got a stew simmering on the fire that'll put hair on your chest. An ale dark enough to blot out the sun. He winks, and you can't help but smile back. This is exactly what you needed. A little bit of human connection, a warm place to rest, and food that doesn't consist of dried rations and wishful thinking. While Barnaby fetches your ale, you take a closer look around the common room. Tapestries depicting heroic deeds adorn the walls, interspersed with hunting trophies and surprisingly, delicate floral arrangements. Someone here has an eye for interior design. Or maybe they just raided a particularly posh garden. You learn something interesting about the history of inns like this. They were far more than just places to sleep. They were hubs of information, where travelers exchanged news, gossip, and even political intrigue. Imagine, the latest royal scandal being whispered over a pint of ale, decisions that would affect the entire kingdom being hashed out between card games. It's a far cry from the sterile news feeds of today. It's like Twitter, but with better beer and considerably more risk of getting stabbed for your opinion. Speaking of risks, there was even a time when many inns in England were literally fronts for criminal activity. Smugglers, highwaymen, you name it. The innkeeper would be in on it, offering safe haven to the unsavory and a convenient place to fence stolen goods. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread phenomenon or simply a colorful exaggeration, but it certainly adds a bit of spice to the image of the humble inn. Barnaby returns with a frothing tankard of ale and a steaming bowl of stew. The aroma alone is enough to make your stomach rumble in protest. He sets them down with a flourish. That'll be 2 silver, friend, he says. You reach into your pouch and count out the coins, handing them over to Barnaby. He nods in satisfaction. Room number 7 is upstairs, he tells you. Clean towels, fresh linens. And if you need anything, just give a shout. You thank him and gratefully take a sip of the ale. It's rich and malty, with a slightly bitter aftertaste. Perfect. You then turn your attention to the stew, spooning a generous portion into your mouth. It's a symphony of flavors, tender chunks of meat, hearty vegetables, and a broth that's been simmering for hours, maybe even days. You close your eyes and savor the moment. This is bliss. As you eat, you eavesdrop on the conversations around you. A group of merchants are haggling over the price of spices, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. 2 soldiers are recounting a recent battle, their words punctuated by bursts of laughter and the clinking of tankards. And in a dimly lit corner, a hooded figure is engaged in a hushed conversation with a shifty-looking individual. You try not to stare. After all, you never know who you might run into in a place like this. You finish your stew and drain your tankard, feeling your energy returning with each bite and sip. You decide to indulge in a bit of conversation. You approach the group of merchants and ask about the prices of goods in the next town. They're surprisingly forthcoming with information, eager to impress upon you their superior knowledge of the market. You feign interest, nodding along as they drone on about tariffs and trade routes. It's like watching a documentary about supply chains, but with more hand gestures and considerably more self-importance. After a while, you excuse yourself and head towards the stairs. Your room awaits, and the siren call of a soft bed is too strong to resist. You climb the creaking wooden steps, your legs feeling slightly less like lead than they did earlier. Room number 7 is small but cozy. A simple bed with a patchwork quilt dominates the space. A small wooden table and chair sit by the window, and a wash basin rests in the corner. It's not luxurious, but it's clean and comfortable. And that's all that matters. You toss your pack onto the floor and sink onto the bed, feeling the mattress give way beneath you. You close your eyes and take a deep breath, letting the tension drain from your body. For the first time in days, you feel safe, secure, and utterly exhausted. Before you drift off to sleep, you remember something you read about medieval travel. People didn't just hop on the equivalent of a horse-drawn Uber. They often relied on a network of monastic orders, religious institutions providing shelter and aid to pilgrims and travelers. It was essentially the original hospitality industry. Imagine checking into a monastery and getting a stern lecture about the importance of prayer along with your complimentary bread and water. On the quirkier side, some believed that certain herbs and amulets could protect travelers from highwaymen and evil spirits. So, not only did you need to worry about getting robbed, but you also had to fend off supernatural attacks. It sounds stressful, even for someone who considers a good night's sleep a competitive sport. You also ponder one of those perpetual historical debates, the degree to which travel in the Middle Ages fostered cultural exchange. Some argue that the movement of people and ideas was crucial for spreading knowledge and innovation. Others contend that travel was relatively limited and that local communities remained largely isolated. It's a classic case of the historians arguing whether the glass is half full or half full of potentially contaminated water. With that thought, you finally succumb to the allure of sleep. The crackling fire downstairs and the distant murmur of voices fade into a comforting background hum. You close your eyes, and darkness envelopes you. You are home. Well, temporarily home. And that's enough for now. Alright, settle in, pull up a stool, and let's talk tavern keepers. You trudge along a muddy road, the twilight painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Your stomach rumbles, your feet ache, and the persistent drizzle is starting to seep through your worn leather boots. Relief, however, is just around the bend. A warm, inviting glow spills from the windows of a nearby building, the promise of food, drink, and respite radiating outwards like a beacon in the gloom. You found a tavern. But who is it that stands behind the counter, wiping down the sticky surface with a practiced hand? Who keeps the fires burning and the ale flowing? Who endures the rowdy songs, the spilled drinks, and the occasional brawl with weary patience? The tavern keeper, that's who. And their life, trust me, wasn't exactly a vacation to Bali. Imagine, if you will, that you are now that tavern keeper. You rise before dawn, the roosters crow your unwelcome alarm clock, not a pleasant synthwave tune. The first task is to get the fire roaring. No central heating here, pal. You chop wood, stack kindling, and pray the damn thing catches quickly. Then, it's off to the cellar to tap a fresh keg of ale. Hopefully, you haven't let it go bad. Nobody wants to be remembered as the tavern keeper who served sour ale, unless you really enjoy ducking flying tankards. Next, comes the food. You're not exactly running a Michelin star establishment. We're talking stew, bread, maybe some cheese if you're feeling fancy. Procuring these ingredients is your responsibility. That means haggling with farmers at the market, tending your own small garden, assuming you have one, or even foraging in the woods. You become surprisingly proficient at identifying edible mushrooms, though there's always that nagging worry you'll accidentally poison your patrons. Talk about a career change. Once the tavern is open, you become a master of multitasking. You pour drinks, serve food, collect payment, hopefully in coin, not chickens, settle arguments, and generally try to keep the peace. You're part bartender, part chef, part bouncer, part therapist. Think of it as the Renaissance version of running a daycare center for adults with very strong opinions on local politics. The clientele can be varied. You get everyone from weary travelers looking for a bed for the night to local farmers gossiping about the price of turnips. You get soldiers celebrating a victory, or drowning their sorrows after a defeat, merchants striking deals, and the occasional shady character lurking in a dark corner. Historians still argue whether taverns were truly the melting pots of society, or simply places where people gathered to get drunk and complain. Either way, they were certainly busy. And speaking of shady characters, one of the most important skills you develop as a tavern keeper is the ability to read people. You need to know who to trust, who to keep an eye on, and who to politely but firmly escort out the door before they start trouble. A sharp wit and a firm hand are essential tools of the trade. Let's be honest, if you can manage a busy tavern on a Friday night, you could probably negotiate world peace. Life wasn't always easy, of course. Disease outbreaks could decimate your clientele. A bad harvest could drive up the price of food and drink. A fire could wipe out your entire business in a matter of hours. And don't even get me started on taxes. Let's just say, the taxman wasn't exactly known for his gentle bedside manner. Interestingly, some tavern keepers actually brewed their own ale. This gave them more control over the quality and price of their product, but it also added another layer of complexity to their already demanding lives. Brewing is a messy, time-consuming process, involving boiling, fermenting, and a whole lot of hoping for the best. Imagine trying to run a tavern while also juggling vats of bubbling wort. It's a wonder they didn't all go completely mad. Now, while we're talking about fringe tidbits, did you know that some taverns even had secret rooms or hidden passages? These could be used for a variety of purposes, from hiding valuables to smuggling goods to conducting secret meetings. Just imagine the possibilities. It was the medieval equivalent of a speakeasy, but with more mead and fewer flapper dresses. Of course, not all tavern keepers were created equal. Some were shrewd businesspeople who amassed considerable wealth and influence. Others struggled to make ends meet, barely scraping by on the meager profits from their trade. Like any profession, success depended on a combination of skill, hard work, and a healthy dose of luck. You'd think the best part of the job would be the constant access to free drinks, right? Think again. Many tavern keepers were surprisingly abstemious. They knew that they needed to stay sharp and focused in order to run their business effectively. Plus, they saw firsthand the consequences of overindulgence. Imagine watching people make questionable decisions all day long. You'd probably lose your taste for ale pretty quickly, too. And the hours? Forget about a 9 to 5. You're working from sunup to well past sundown, often 7 days a week. There's always something to do, whether it's cleaning, cooking, serving, or dealing with drunken patrons. Your social life consists of nodding politely to the occasional customer you recognize. Vacations? Forget about it. Your tavern is your life, and your life is your tavern. It's a very codependent relationship. Yet, despite all the hardships, many tavern keepers found a certain satisfaction in their work. They provided a vital service to their communities, offering a place for people to gather, relax, and connect with one another. They were often respected figures, trusted confidants, and even informal advisors. And hey, at least they had a roof over their heads and a steady supply of stew. That's something, right? One of the quirks of the job. Dealing with the local wildlife. Rats were a constant problem, as were stray dogs and cats. And don't even think about leaving food unattended, unless you want to share it with the local crow population. It was a constant battle against nature, waged with brooms, traps, and a healthy dose of resignation. It was basically a medieval version of Animal Planet, but with more ale. And you know, there were even female tavern keepers. While society was often dominated by men, women could and did own and operate taverns, sometimes inheriting them from their husbands or fathers. They faced unique challenges, of course, but they were often just as capable and successful as their male counterparts. Talk about breaking the glass ceiling, one pint at a time. Of course, you also become the local gossip hub. Everyone knows the tavern keeper, and everyone wants to tell you their story. You hear all the latest news, rumors, and scandals. You become a repository of local knowledge, whether you want to or not. Just be careful what you repeat, because loose lips sink ships, or at least get you into a very awkward conversation with the blacksmith. And while the food might not have been gourmet, it was often hearty and filling. Stews, breads, cheeses, and salted meats were staples of the tavern menu. These were foods that could be stored for long periods of time and cooked easily. They provided the sustenance that travelers and locals needed to keep going. It wasn't fancy, but it did the job. You know, sometimes, the simplest things are the most satisfying. And sometimes, after a long day, a bowl of hot stew and a pint of ale is all you need to make the world right again. Just hopefully, you're on the right side of the counter. Okay, settle in, grab your favorite beverage, chamomile tea, maybe? Because we're about to embark on a historical pub crawl, of the mind. Tonight, we're tracing the twilight of the medieval tavern, that humble haven, that, oh, alright, often rowdy refuge of the common folk. You trudge down a muddy lane, the setting sun painting the thatched roofs a fiery orange. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and something vaguely meaty. It's been a long day of, well, your day, back in the 21st century, probably involved spreadsheets and existential dread. But imagine a day of backbreaking labor in the fields. You'd be craving a pint, wouldn't you? Reaching the sign, a crooked wooden board depicting, perhaps, a vaguely recognizable boar, you push open the heavy oak door. The warmth rushes out to greet you, a welcome contrast to the evening chill. Inside, the scene unfolds before you, a low-ceilinged room filled with rough-hewn tables, benches worn smooth by generations of, well, sitting, and the murmur of voices rising above the crackling fire. You can almost taste the ale, feel the comforting weight of it in your hand. The tavern, you see, wasn't just about the beer. Although, let's be honest, the beer was a major draw. Most water wasn't exactly palatable, let alone safe. So, ale, which had been boiled in the brewing process, was a much safer option, especially for the kiddies. Think of it as early juice boxes, with a very low ABV, of course. Historians still argue whether beer or other alcoholic beverages was safer to drink or more enjoyable. But beyond the thirst-quenching aspect, the tavern was a social hub. A place to hear the news, exchange gossip, medieval Twitter, if you will, and, if you were lucky, catch a traveling minstrel spinning a tale of brave knights and damsels in distress. Or, more likely, a tale of a knight who tripped over a pig and a damsel who threw a rotten turnip at him. Remember, this was the Middle Ages, humor wasn't always sophisticated. The tavern keeper, the hostler, was a figure of considerable importance. He was part bartender, part news anchor, part referee when things got a little spirited. He was also responsible for providing food and lodging, if you were willing to sleep in a communal room full of snoring strangers. Ah, the joys of budget travel. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Did you know that some taverns had special gossip stones? These were stones near the tavern door where people would gather to exchange the latest rumors and local happenings. I guess you could say they were the medieval equivalent of the water cooler, except instead of discussing last night's TV shows, they were debating whether the blacksmith's wife was really seeing the miller. As the medieval period waned, so too did the fortunes of the traditional tavern. The rise of the middle class, with their own homes and gathering spaces, started to change the dynamic. Coffee houses began to emerge, offering a stimulating alternative to the ale-soaked atmosphere of the tavern. And, let's face it, coffee makes you less likely to start a brawl over a game of dice. Probably. You notice the fire's glow casting long shadows on the walls. A lute player begins a mournful ballad, the melody echoing the slow decline of this way of life. But don't despair. The spirit of the tavern, that sense of community and connection, never truly vanished. It evolved, adapted, and found new forms in pubs, cafes, and even online forums. Even the laws governing taverns became increasingly stringent. In England, for example, the assize of bread and ale regulated the price and quality of bread and ale. Imagine getting fined for serving a flat pint. Talk about a buzzkill. Of course, not everything was rosy in the tavern. They could be dens of gambling, prostitution, and general debauchery. It was all a question of whether the ends justified the means. But some historians believe that taverns gave women more power and autonomy. In some instances, women owned and operated the taverns, managing their own businesses and becoming significant figures in their communities. What a woman! The legacy of the medieval tavern can still be felt today. Think about your local pub. It's more than just a place to grab a drink. It's a place to meet friends, celebrate milestones, and commiserate over life's little disappointments. It's a place where strangers can become friends, where laughter echoes, and where, for a few hours, you can forget your troubles and simply be. And now, as the virtual fire in our imaginary tavern slowly fades to embers, let's take a moment to appreciate the quiet solitude of the night. You've journeyed back in time, tasted the ale of the Middle Ages, and experienced the warmth of a bygone era. As you settle into your own comfortable space, let the echoes of that ancient tavern lull you into a peaceful slumber. The world outside may be filled with noise and chaos, but here, in the quiet of your own mind, you can find a sanctuary of calm. Breathe deeply, let your muscles relax, and allow the gentle rhythm of your breath to guide you towards sleep. The images of the tavern begin to soften, the sounds of laughter and music fade into the distance, replaced by the gentle hush of the night. The flickering candlelight dims, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The murmur of conversations gradually subsides, replaced by the quiet crackle of the fire. The air grows cooler, carrying the scent of wood smoke and distant fields. You feel a sense of peace settle over you, a feeling of being grounded and connected to something ancient and enduring. Let that feeling wash over you now, smoothing away the worries of the day, calming your mind, and preparing you for a night of restful sleep. Sleep soundly, friend, and dream sweet dreams.